Well, welcome everyone to the Instructional Policy and Student Achievement Board Committee, and welcome to our 3 official members now on this committee, and the addition of Ms. Autry, which is wonderful, and the return Mrs. Mansfield and Mrs. McKittrick to this fine, we always say the most important subcommittee of the board, right? We're the machine that drives it all. I'm sure Mr. Pendleton would probably, argue otherwise, and maybe the superintendent would say, well, the board policy committee is really rather important, but, we always said Goodyear, the most important thing Goodyear does is build tires, right? And for us, it's teaching and learning for our students. That's what runs this machine in the district, and the important work actually in the entire city. We have quite a few updates attached in our board docs where we put all of our agenda and our attachments. So there's quite a few updates that I'm sure we won't get to all of those during this meeting, but you can peruse them, and we'll also include them for the rest of the board. And Mrs. Mansfield, Ms. McKittrick, and Ms. Autry, do you want me just to start by going through the board doc items that'll be coming up at the next board meeting and start with those before we tackle some other topics? Is that the sequence that you all would like today?
Whatever you're most comfortable with is fine with me.
Agreed.
Okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen just because there's quite a few items here that'll probably be easier for us just to look together. So Ms. Autry, what I do before each of the board meetings, we pull just some noteworthy items off of the agenda for the board meeting. And it's just listed sort of in the same sequence. If there's items that I want to showcase, talk through, that are coming to the consent agenda, they'll be listed under consent agenda, and then business affairs items and other agenda items. So all those under discussion are anything that's heading to the board or soon to be going to the board will be in that section under number 2 here. So for the next board meeting on the 25th, there are a few grants that I just pulled out so that you're aware of them. Continued partners that have supported our teachers for years now. GPD has individual grants that can go directly to teachers and principals or teams of teachers, and those are the types of things listed here under that item. And then we, at this committee and with the board, we've talked a lot about the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative grant. The CZI is what they go by. And that grant, the $1.5 million that this board item is now to accept this grant that will be coming through the United Way. So United Way will receive the money. They will keep $231,000 of that money to support the expansion of our family resource centers. And then the rest of the balance will come quarterly to us from United Way. We'll just draw down quarterly to support the 2 major focus areas for this grant is our equity work run by Carla Chapman, and all of the strategies that you all have embedded in the equity policy, the racism as a public health resolution, and soon the racial justice policy. All the strategies built in there are also supported through this grant, and Carla Chapman will be the lead for that portion of it. And then the second half of the grant is to support the design and planning and launch of implementation items under our elementary college and career academies, which I am thrilled about. And our plan is to convene a master planning team, and we can continue to talk about that at this committee to see who would want to serve. Again, usually I invite the instructional policy members to come and attend those master planning sessions, but we also then invite the rest of the board if people want to pop in. It's a little bit easier because it'll be remote, most likely this spring, for them to do their design and planning, so that hopefully at a future meeting, we'll try to map out the timeline like we did with the middle school with this committee on when we should bring it, most likely in the summertime or right at the end of this year, to bring their master plan for approval. Is there any questions just about that elementary? Maybe on the next meeting, I'll make a note for us to really map out that timeline and how you want to bring it through the board. Dr. Hall had recommended that we had the retreat this year, but he also recommended that we have a combined instructional policy and finance committee when we're at the budget phase, so that we all can look at the budget together. Do you have any thoughts about that at this point?
Combined sounds, I do love when we have the retreat, because it's just a little bit more relaxed, and I feel like everybody gets to hear the information. Even if we're hearing it for the second time, I think it reinforces it with us, but I love that it's a little more relaxed than having it roll out in a board meeting. There's just, the agenda is so driven when we're in a board meeting. But I think it's great to do a joint meeting for the budget part. That's a great idea on that. You know what, then you don't have to do it twice, once for each of us. And I think it's a great idea. If we, as long as the schedules will come together.
Yeah, I think it felt a little, because the retreat, we didn't have quite the length of time that we did with the high school, where we did the budget all at the same time. You know, we did the master plan and the budget at the high school retreat years ago. And this time we didn't block as much time to be able to do both. So maybe we can just be thinking about what that looks like. And and then at our next meeting, we can map out a timeline so that we get that on the calendar and sequence that through at the end of the year. And maybe that'll be the last thing the superintendent approves before that would be kind of nice to do it before he retires. Mrs. McKittrick, were you going to say something?
I was going to say that I like the idea of having the joint meetings. I think it's nice to have that overlap.
Great. Okay. So for the other thing, I just wanted to clarify in the CZI grant, the $231,000 that's listed here that United Way will keep to support the family resource centers, that by the time we're done with this grant, which is a year-long grant, it goes from January 1st through next January, we'll be expanding from 3 family resources to, it's like 4.5. It's hard to say a half of a family resource center, but staffing wise, we will have I think it's actually listed in this board item. Does it say where it is? Oh, it doesn't. It's in, let me click in this family resource center update, because I think Ms. Chapman added it in here. Yeah, so our family resource centers at Helen Arnold and Robinson continue, to operate. Then they're interviewing currently for the Family Resource Center coordinator to expand to Mickey Bright. So we'll have, right now, this year, we'll have Bookstall East and Kenmore Garfield clusters finished. And then there's been a real desire, because Kenmore Garfield is such an expansive cluster, that they would hire a half-time person to go into the Kenmore part of the Kenmore Garfield cluster to serve that neighborhood. And that would cover the Innis, Sam Salem, Pfeiffer, and Reimer schools. So that would be a half-time person versus a full-time, but there'll be some, a person being able to serve that. So that's where we'll get to 3.5. And then the last cluster we're looking at that would be in the North cluster, that they're still talking and planning, and Ms. Chapman is still working with the superintendent and United Way on where that will be located for the North cluster. And that will be finish our 4.5 staff members serving those areas. Any questions about that? Or the superintendent, did you want to add anything about that expansion?
No, I mean, I think that was kind of the plan all along, is to have those resources similar to what, a lot of people talk about the I Promise School and how, oh, it's so nice, but United Way has worked with us so we can have similar services at the cluster level across the district.
Right.
Ellen, do we have an identification of where the other Kenmore one will go, or is that still in the works?
Not yet. We've looked at a number of locations, including some community-based locations. Originally, it was going to go right into where the Financial Empowerment Center is, but once they looked further into that space, it looks like they will not be able to accommodate an additional staff member located there, plus space for families. Superintendent, I don't think there's been a final decision on that, where they'll be housed.
Right. We're still looking at that.
And I'm sure that space is an issue on North Hill as well, as it seems to be.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Right. Okay, under the business affairs items.
I'm sorry, I did have a quick question before you move forward. I was just wondering, is there any tracking? I'm just curious, with these being based in our elementaries, are the middle school or high school families utilizing these centers much? Are we tracking that at all? I'm just curious about that.
I know they. Yeah, go ahead, Superintendent.
I was going to say United Way is tracking it, and they do advertise those services cluster-wide. So like for Robinson and Helen Arnold, it's just not, when they started out, it was the area immediately around, but they've expanded it to its cluster-wide.
Yeah, we can, I'm sure Ms. Chapman, I'll ask her if she has data on exactly where the families are coming from. And it doesn't also have to be just our families. They're really designed to also serve the neighborhood. So there can be non-APS people just from the neighborhood coming in as well. The neighborhood meaning that entire cluster area. The original design, Ms. Autry, that we're still working through in terms of the long range plan was, do we connect these family resource centers into maybe a more centralized kind of hub, and then the smaller FRCs end up in the elementaries that really serve more that elementary, and then have the middle school serve as kind of an actual center that connects the elementary hubs. So it was sort of a center with lines going down, that they would all work collaboratively together under one supervisor that would help. Our family liaisons would help serve that role at the elementaries. And so that was sort of the big design, but they wanted to get started, just opening them and not waiting for the millions of dollars that it will eventually take to do the larger scale. But I really liked that kind of original design, that maybe our middle schools would be sort of the big central place in the cluster. And then we would just connect these elementary locations to the middle school. So that, I think that's still the vision long term, but it's going to take multiple years to get there. And the high school families would also be served by the middle school. And in some clusters, those are combined buildings, which was even more ideal. Any other questions about that, or feedback and thoughts? We used to have a regular schedule. We've just suspended it a little bit during this COVID time with the board meetings, but where each of the major initiatives did like regular, every 4 months or so, they would come and do an update to the board, and Family Resource Centers with Ms. Chapman was one of those. So maybe we can try to get that on the calendar sometime this semester, to be able to hear an update on everything in terms of equity and family connections, and we can hear an update on the Family Resource Centers. Okay, moving on to the business affairs. The textbook items are, I just wanted to put this on here just to remind you, and this is an area that we're always lobbying for the state, and I always like to just kind of showcase things for you all when you're in meetings down in Columbus, or you're with our own legislators. The whole area of college credit plus, and Ms. Autry, maybe you've heard some of this on the finance committee. We continue, this is an area where we are huge supporters of College Credit Plus and being able to have our partnerships with the universities and expanding that. And the area of textbooks, purchasing those, how we secure those, use those again in subsequent years, and how that interaction is with the university is still always a stress point in terms of how that works. And there's always discussions with the state. They keep that over the years. It was the university's responsibility. Then it's gotten kicked to us. Now it's sort of a shared responsibility. So that whole area, how expensive college textbooks are, and how we buy them and then have to reuse them or sell them back. I mean, it's a beast in and of itself. So I put that on here just as a note so that I would mention it to you, and then we'll find time to dive into it further later, especially when we have opportunities to advocate for changes down in Columbus. And then the Howard Group is a professional development group that we've had in quite a bit in the district. So I just pulled that out to showcase that, which is some of our continued racial justice training. And this one, they've done a lot at Kenmore, Garfield, and now East is engaging the same presenter for East now. And then the last one is this business and education leadership training on teacher efficacy, and that's with Helen Arnold. So those are just examples of some of the trainings that are being held. Any questions about those? And these are all the School Quality Improvement Grant. Ms. Autry, that particular grant, you'll see a lot, and the way the state has designed school improvement money this year, it's actually been the past 2 years, is all around developing teacher leaders. So you can't spend the money on anything. You can't spend it on supplies. You can't spend it on tutoring. You can't spend it on anything but training on leadership development for teachers. And that's why over the past year, there's been more professional developments than probably ever before all around this leadership of teachers. And that's all that school quality improvement grant that's out of Mr. Harrington's area in school improvement. We do have this next board meeting, we have the Governor's Thomas Edison Award. Mrs. Mansfield, you'll laugh because it's, you know, Katrina Halassa and Science Awards again, but that's up next. So we'll do a recognition at the beginning. And I had already sent information about that earlier, and we have bumped it a few meetings just because our board meetings had gotten so busy that we bumped this one for a little bit, but we do have that coming up on Monday. And then I have a couple more grants that I won't take the time to go through those, just so we have some time to talk about the full-time in-person topic. But we were awarded a state library grant that is explained here. And we actually ended up with 2 Congressional App Challenge Awards at the STEM High School. One you already were aware of that already went to board, that we already talked about. This one is actually from Congresswoman Fudge now. So this is a second Congressional App Award. The first one was Congressman Ryan, and now this one is Congresswoman Fudge, that they won a second App Challenge Award. So we'll bring that to the board and recognize them at some point, but I wanted to let you know now. And a Positive Behavior Support Award that also is being awarded for Hatton's work on positive behavior supports. And they've won this previously. That's a state award. So those will go on our list and cycle of being able to recognize people at the beginning of the board meeting, as we've been doing. Any questions about those? All right, then the topic of the hour, because I wanted to make sure we had plenty of time to just hear updates and talk about the return to full-time in-person learning. I have up here some timelines that I thought we could just kind of go through. I'm glad the superintendent is here because I'm sure he can give us an update on the vaccine and distribution. But just to talk about this and get feedback from all of you, I can show you our updated family website and information we have there. And I think most importantly will be, I would love to have your help, because you all are on the front line of getting all the questions from families, that we hear from families, that you all can let me know what the major questions are, and that I can make sure we build that on our FAQ section on our website about the return in March. So all of this is, you know, starting that timeline and leading up, and this timeline is the same thing the superintendent went through with you at the last board meeting, but I've got just some details, you know, specifically so you can see exactly what day things are happening. So we've already gotten through these first couple things. Is the updated, we updated our staff hub site, it's called, regarding the vaccination process. You all have seen all the communication about completing the survey that went out to all the staff. The deadline, I actually reminded all of the board members to see the vaccine email this afternoon, and the the survey closes at 5 o'clock today. So in a few minutes, the survey closes on all of the staff indicated whether they want the vaccine through the Akron Public Schools or not. And then at the end of the week, the superintendent has to submit that information. So we got through last week, and here's where we are right now. We've already done this. You approved this last week to send the commitment form, or you approved that at the last board meeting. We updated our family website that I'll show you in a minute. And by the 22nd of this week, we'll have the family selection survey will go out and stay open all of next week. And hopefully you've started yesterday or this morning, we started sending out social media blasts about the new website and starting to drive people to the website that has new information. So let me pause first, and why don't we kind of tackle any questions or information about the vaccine process, and maybe the superintendent can give us an update on what all of his conversations with the Department of Public Health has been so far.
Yeah, so I did send in the commitment form on the 18th. We had a meeting last week with the deputy state superintendent because a group of us are working with him to talk about the process and any concerns. And then today I got a survey, which I've asked Deborah Folk to work with Northeast Ohio ESC regarding some information that they need to submit to the Ohio Department of Health. So from what I understand, we'll be assigned a partner who will get the vaccine from the state, for all of the school districts. So for instance, in Summit County, there will be providers assigned to each of the school districts, and that provider will be prioritized to get the vaccine that will then be used to inoculate or vaccinate our staff. And so we're waiting to hear when that process is actually going to start. And then we'll be working with Summit County Public Health regarding our employees who are interested in taking the vaccine. And we'll have to work with them to make sure they're identified. And of course, because we're so large, we're still advocating that we set up pods in our locations for our staff to get vaccinated. So there's still a lot of work that has to be done, but we are in contact with the state and our local health department to just make sure we're in the loop on getting that information.
Dr. James, I sent an email today that you answered to me, and I know that Dr. Hall and Dr. Akbar were copied on that just because that's how I sent it. But can you fill the rest of us in on what happens with coaches or
Sure.
APS employees?
Yeah, so most of our coaches work for Akron Public Schools. We have contracts with them, so many of them were on the list of people who were to respond. For those who are paid, there are some cases where a booster club will donate money and then they want to hire a certain coach. And then there's also volunteer coaches. We're still working through some of that. But Deborah Folk is working with athletics and just making sure anyone who's working with our kids is identified. And then, we're adding them to our list. Similar, we have van drivers who are independent contractors, are not our employees, but we're adding them to the list because, when in-person school starts, there is a group of kids who have to take vans to school every day. And so anyone who's on, that there's a question about if they're working with our kids, we're putting them on a list so we can have them covered.
And same thing with our substitute teachers. All substitutes
Absolutely.
are eligible as well, because they can, day to day be called in to serve too.
Thanks for that. I had a couple of questions from people, so I appreciate it.
Yes.
And know that
So,
anytime you forward, go ahead, Dr. James.
I was gonna say a lot of time, it's easy when you just have a district with a high school, a middle school, and 2 elementaries, all right? And you probably hire most of the people in our district, with like almost 4,000 people. It's a very different story because we have a lot of, I'll say independent contractors that work in the schools every day. And so we're a different situation. And the health department understands that. So we're working with them on all of this.
So this Friday is when the superintendent has to submit our numbers to the Summit County Public Health. So the staff survey closes today. That'll give us tomorrow to make sure any of these, the independent kind of groups that, like the van drivers, that we've caught them, make sure we received all of their information, and then we can turn it in on Friday. And then that's actually sort of the order of here's how many doses that we need through the Akron Public Schools. Any other questions about when, assuming that, we're still slated in the governor's priorities in that segment 1B, that this would be the week that we would start getting through the distribution process once we're notified what that's going to look like from the Summit County Public Health, then that would happen, start the first week. And then we're anticipating that somewhere around then, depending on when that first week starts, if it's February 1st, then we would look at, it would be somewhere around the week of March 1st. Some of it depends on which vaccine we get, whether it's the Pfizer or the Moderna, and how many days in between the first dose and the second dose. So these are all, I put very clearly, this is the estimate based on the vaccine availability, the type of vaccine, on what that difference between the first week and the second week. Is there a question in the chat that I just heard? I don't have my,
Yes, please.
because I'm casting. Yeah, if you can go ahead, Mrs. McKittrick.
So let's say everything goes according to plan with the vaccinations. What are we looking at as far as getting the kids back in school? What's the date?
Well, even at the last board meeting, as I reported out, that date is going to fluctuate. So as early as March 1st, and in my report to the board at the last board meeting, I said as far down as March 22nd. Because I know that once our staff start to get that first vaccination, we're going to have issues if they can't get that second vaccination within the proper time frame. So either 3 weeks for the one vaccine or 4 weeks for the other. And so, we can target that March 1st, but if we don't get that first vaccine for the majority of our teachers who agree to take it, like if it's February 15th, that date may have to slide just to make sure that, there's very little risk for those people who have the 2 vaccinations versus 1, and then trying to get that second one, and kids are already in school. So those are some things we have to see when we're going to get that first round.
Okay, thank you.
Right, a lot will happen depending on this magical week, that what happens that first week and how the distribution goes and how many staff we can get in that first week.
And then after the second dose, there's still, I believe, a 2-week period before full immunity is obtained as well.
Right, Miss Autry. And then the one thing that we're hearing is that they recommend that people still follow this, it's like you get the 2 shots and you just don't, like you're magically cured. They still want you to wear a mask and observe all the safety protocols. And I think that is the prudent thing to do. And so that is another, that's another one that we'll have to monitor.
And that also varies just a little bit depending on which vaccine we actually get between the Moderna and the Pfizer. What we did, we put on how many days after that second dose are you really at full immunity. We did put on our hub site, which is our internal website, where the vaccine, and this was in the email sent to you, the actual hub site lists all sorts of information, FAQs about the process for our staff, but we also link directly to the CDC information about the 2 different vaccines and all the details so people could understand and see for themselves, depending on which one. We don't know today what it's going to be, but which one will come. They'll be able to read about both and make their decision about the vaccine, and then kind of look at what that timeline looks like. And you can find that too, because you have access to that hub site following the link. You just have to put your password in when you click on that, as if you're logging into your APS system. The good news is that we are starting to bring students back, and we all have talked a lot about, and I think as a board, you've been very attracted to that transition of students back in, rather than we have one day where we just, instantaneously every kid comes back. And so Remote Plus, we really are no longer, and this was probably about a month ago, we really stopped thinking about Remote Plus as this separate thing. It really is the way that we're transitioning to that full-time return of our students in that early March time, depending on the vaccine schedule. So Remote Plus, I also have on here on this calendar so that you can kind of understand how that flow is happening also. We have, right now, our staff are finalizing the list that they had already put together before break. They had already identified the students that they wanted to come in for Remote Plus. They're revising those and just double checking those to make sure that based on the grades that have now come in, make any changes to your list. That's what's happening this week. That the final lists are actually due by the end of today, so that I can take a look at those the next couple days to see the total number of students that have been recommended. And then on Monday, starting Monday, school staff can begin notifying families that they've been referred for this Remote Plus intervention, and then see if the family says yes or no, whether they want their child to come in. So all of that process will start next week, so that we get a final number of how many families have said yes to having their students come in. K-12, pre-K through 12. It actually goes all the way down to preschool. We'll be having some of the students come in as well. So on Monday, I should be able to give you an update at the board on Monday, just estimates on how many students will be coming in. I won't get the confirmation on how many parents said yes versus how many students referred. That won't be until the end of next week. But I should be able to give you a sense of, here's about how many students will be coming in under Remote Plus starting that week of February 1st. As a reminder for, just in terms of what the models look like, for elementary, because it's been, before winter break that we talked about this. For elementary, it's 1 day a week there'll be 1 day a week in the North Cluster, for example, will be the Remote Plus day. And the kids will come all day, and they'll be in pods during the day where they'll get supported instruction while they're still connecting with their teachers remotely. But they'll be in the school all day getting that support. And then towards the end of the day, they'll get a block of intervention with the teachers specifically on deficit areas that they're working on. And at the middle school, it's a half day where the kids will come in a pod kind of concept like that, where they'll get support while they're connecting remotely. And then at the end of the day, it's generally an hour and a half kind of block for intervention, uniquely for their skill deficits. And then at the high school, it's really by academy and by subject. As you know, high school is always a bit unique because it's so tied to their exact physics class or their exact welding class for CTE. So it's really specific to the teachers who are doing the Remote Plus and which students need to come in. The high schools are really obviously prioritizing their seniors for industry credentials and for making sure they're getting the intervention support to recover any credits that they're missing and need. And so they're doing just kind of a full court press on seniors, and then they'll fill in other students once they really make sure they've got the seniors who need support taken care of. So I'm excited about that whole process that'll start. And then that really is starting our return. So we're not really saying anymore that we're starting a return in March. We're really starting a return February 1st, and we're starting with students who need the intervention support, and then we'll be able to transition to the full time. So any questions, comments, things you're hearing in the community, about Remote Plus? We have a spot on our website about Remote Plus, but the bulk of that really is coming from individual calls to families, since it's not everybody. I can pull up this is our 2021 website. Let me show you where this is. I'll just go to our main page so that you can see where this is located. This is our main website and our Learning 2021. This is everything about how we're learning this year. And when you scroll down, here's eventually where the parent selection survey will go, where they're filling out exactly how they want their child, whether they want to stay 100% remote or whether they want to come back full time in March. There's a letter explaining that from the superintendent. And then down here is where they'll make the selection, or they'll get information about the selection. And I'll come back and show you that. And then here's a tile about Remote Plus. And it just has some basic information about it here, and then notifies the families that they'll be contacted individually to talk about the opportunity. So any questions about that?
Ellen, do you have that calendar you were just sharing with us? Can you, do we have a copy of that exactly? Was it in the last board meeting? I know we've seen the dates, but it's all.
Yeah, I'll send this to you again.
Okay, the Ward 8 meeting is tonight. I'd like to share some of this information. I mean, I won't share the screen. I'll just talk, but.
Yeah, as soon as we're done, I'll forward this to all of you.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
And I'll point them to that website link as well.
Right, that's the best location, to find everything. And what will happen, so right now, this section right here that says to guide your selection regarding how you want your child to attend school. This just went live yesterday or late last night. And this is where families can go and look at the decision they'll be making is right here. Do you want your child the last quarter of school to go full-time in person, or do you want to remain 100% remote? Okay. And it specifically says to guide your selection regarding how you want your child to attend school for the last quarter of school. That's really the language we're using, is the last quarter, because that starts in the middle of March. And then just like we were talking about, that date of when that will be triggered, we'll be watching what happens with the vaccine. But we'll be asking families next week. We'll release a survey Friday, but then all next week, the principals and teachers will be supporting and talking to families about filling out this selection form. And this will actually be the third time that families have said, here's what I want. If you remember back in July, we sent out a survey. And then in October, we sent out the selection form where they had to pick blended or 100% remote. And now so they're used to this process, and the principals and teachers work to get 100% of the parents to fill it out. The reason why we're asking this next week is given this vaccine now, this is a very different question now to say for the last quarter, do you want your child to stay remote, or do you want them to come back full-time in person? And we need to know that answer to then match our staff, where some of our staff may have a medical exemption that they can't come back to work face-to-face, and then we can kind of match, here's how many teachers we need to continue the remote, and here's how many kids want the in-person, so that we can make those decisions about that final staffing piece. Until we get the numbers, it's impossible, because it could be 20% of the kids, it could be 40% of the kids, it could be 10% of the families. It's a very different decision for the last quarter versus when we were asking them back in October.
I have a question about the survey. I know there was some confusion before, misunderstanding with families thinking that if they came in a hybrid model or in person, that they would, keep the same teachers. And so all of that is likely to change, correct? If they come
correct. And I did, right, Ms. Autry, and I did bring that up at the last board meeting that, I can't guarantee that when a child returns to school, that it's all going to be dependent on how many teachers we have available who are willing to come in, and get the vaccine and work. Some might have medical conditions where they have to stay home. We'll have to work through, all that. We're going to try and, keep that staffing, but with a number of subs, I think we may need, they may not be sitting with the same teacher, that they would typically have had online.
Right, and it really
also have a change as well, correct?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it really is both ways, right? Right, Ms. Autry. If you stay remote, it may be a different teacher. If you come in person, it may be a different teacher.
Right.
And we actually put that right here at the beginning. So this is what I did. Let me go back and show you just so you can see this. So where the two choices are that we were just talking about, when you click on the full-time in-person choice, this gives you the information about the timeline, transportation. It gives you, for example, what the health and safety. These are the same types of things we posted back in the fall when we were thinking that we were going to come back blended. So all the safety things are pretty consistent with what families saw before when we were considering bringing students back. But right at the top here, it says full-time in-person option. This option enables your child to return to in-person school 5 days per week for the last quarter of school. Since some families will choose to have their students return to full-time in person and other families will choose 100% remote, your child's teacher and schedule may change as we implement both learning options. And then we also included it down at the bottom. There's a question and answer. There is a question somewhere in here about will my teacher change? I can't find it real quickly, but there is a question that reinforces it too. Ms. McKittrick?
I
Was there a,
I think
sorry.
Akron did.
Okay, I thought I heard the chat.
Yeah, I raised my hand. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
So this was one of the biggest points of contention that we received last time, as you remember. And it wasn't because it wasn't there, it was overlooked. Maybe we need to find a way to make it a little more apparent or emphasized, because I don't know, this was every board member's experience, but I feel like we got an onslaught of emails saying that if we knew that our teacher would have changed, we would have never picked that option. How dare you not tell us? And come to find out, it was very clear as day there. So I just want to make sure we do a good job of trying to make it a little more apparent. So bolding maybe, or making, honestly, that wording, even for me, is a bit small. I also have eye problems, so I have glasses, but I can't see. So, and then the page before here where you click remote or in person.
Yep. This one.
Yep. So if you could write under, if you scroll down just a little bit. Yep. So right before it says dates to remember, if you could put a line that's kind of big and bold that says both options may require teacher change or something. You can work the language, but that's kind of bold, so that we're trying to be a little more clear in emphasizing that.
Yeah, this is the perfect exact feedback that we need, because you guys hear, that direct line from families. And if that's the biggest thing that you heard, we need to definitely make that showcased. Options too. Okay. That'll be an easy thing that I can do tonight.
Ellen, I have something too. So I know we've talked about this before, and I know that if you guys haven't implemented, there's probably not a way to do it, but I somehow wish, if I had a magic wand, that we could still let the teachers, the relationship is forged at this point, albeit loosely, right? Because it's remote. But I just so wish that there was a way that we could project the kids that are staying remote on the screen, and the teacher can be teaching those kids as well. I know it's a different kind of teaching, but they're also not going to throw all the lessons that they've done all year into the virtual trash can, right? They're still going to have that, as they've learned how to do it now. They're experts at virtual learning. And the other thing that somehow in my head allows is, for a teacher that can't be there, does it allow for them to be the one projected on the screen, and then we have a substitute, or we have another responsible classroom manager, somebody who's got some experience on how to, manage the needs of children that's in the classroom, so that teacher that has to stay remote can stay remote. I know that if that was easily done, that you guys would have found a way. I'm just struggling so hard with, no matter what you choose, you may not keep your teacher or stay with your class. It's just so hard for me to swallow that one. So I just have to say it out loud and see, I'm sure
Right.
there's a reason, so I'll just be quiet.
No. You are articulating perfectly the challenge of making the change that last quarter, because and it's sort of a chicken and egg thing, because we won't know exactly that how it's going to play out and how many teachers may need to change until we see how many families pick which option. And I wish we could know before the families, so that I could tell family, X, that your teacher's going to change, now make the decision on whether you want full-time or remote, but it's impossible to do it that way, because we have to know all those numbers and then run the different schedules to see. And it gets most complicated at secondary when you have to have the exact licensed person for each class. Finding, and I've given this example at instructional policy, figuring out what to do in a welding class for remote kids for welding and in class for welding is much more complex and difficult to do in a welding kind of hands-on class. Like, how do you do both? And you have to have the proper licensure for welding, for God's sake. Like, it's really difficult for them to even come in and take over a remote class for welding versus an elementary class where there's a little more flexibility because of the licensure requirements, or a physics class or a calculus class at the high school. So we do, but we are, at the same time, we are prepared once we see the numbers of which model that the families want. We're prepared to run the different scenarios to say, here's what it would look like if we do exactly what you just described, where we have teachers teach remotely and in person at the same time, but we put additional support people in the remote to help supervise, and that kind of model. Depending on the percentage of the families who pick it, we'll be able to say, okay, here's exactly how this would look like. And we have a teacher team, Pat Shipe and I, with AEA, we have a team that are prepared once we see the numbers to run those models. And then here's what it looks like if we have a separate remote class and a separate remote almost campus, and then in-person teachers. And then there's some kind of in-between hybrids of both of those, that they are prepared once we see the numbers of how many teachers have medical exemptions and how many teachers or how many families pick which option, then we can see which one can we pull off. And it's the hard, frustrating part is families want to know personally for their own child, is the teacher going to change or not, depending on those different models. And we just can't answer that until we get all the numbers, and then we'll be able to run the model, and we'll bring that back to the board to have further discussions about it.
I appreciate that. It's so hard. And I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, I know what I've seen what the master schedules just for one high school looks like, drawn on the whiteboards that they have. And it gives me, it makes you just feel like you're going to pass out. So I can't imagine what it looks like when you're doing this with the whole district. I can't even imagine. So I appreciate that that's a thought that's being considered, that we really are going to try to do that. As much as we're warning people that it's a possibility, it's nice to know that that's a priority as well.
Right. I think the most important thing is to have a team of teachers and principals in a room. Ms. Shipe and I just met with them yesterday afternoon, to have them in a room. I'll give them the numbers next week. We'll be able to run the models. And then bring the best recommendation to you and the superintendent to say, here's what we can pull off, or maybe two options to say, here's what we can pull off, and then we'll all make that decision on how to staff both options. They're the brilliant people who actually know how to pull this off. So we rely on them to be able to bring those recommendations, as we've done this whole time for the last year. Any other yes, Dr. Eckler?
Just want to say thank you for presenting this. I know I put in the chat, but I thought maybe it'd be good to vocalize that. Just to share, you know, especially even to Miss Mansfield's point, going to be easy or a perfect world, but you know, the goal has always been to find a way to get our students back in the classrooms, and so we're going to have to do it. And the hope is any of those bumps in the roads that we find out in this last quarter, we can figure it out. If for a chance we have to have both options next year as well. And the good thing is we'll be starting that off at the beginning of the semester, hopefully. I can't predict what Corona will do or what will happen, but the hope is, you know, that will allow us to still do that. So thank you.
Absolutely, and that's actually what I shared with the design team this week. I said, I want us to solve this last quarter and you all to help design how we're going to staff both, you know, both options simultaneously. I said, but really what you're designing is for the long term. How do we take this unbelievable experience that we've had with remote education and all this just huge burst and acceleration of talent now that we have in this remote world, and make this part of our system forever. And that I actually serve on the state remote edX advisory council with the state superintendent, and that they're answering that same question. You know, how do we make sure that the state supports remote education now so that this just becomes part of our fabric? Not that everybody will pick this 100%, but I can envision, and the superintendent has envisioned this for a number of years before COVID, is to have our remote opportunities just sort of embedded in our course catalog, just like the universities do, where you're picking your courses and this one is remote and these two are face-to-face. And maybe this next course is a combination of remote and face-to-face, because it frees up time for you to do more in-depth internships out in the community. And then you just connect in remotely to some of your courses because you can do this internship. And so that's the vision that we have, is that this just becomes part of our business. And I think whatever we decide this last quarter, you know, this is an opportunity for us to at least take this major step towards that reality that we could launch next year.
It's so much of what you and I talked about. You know, Ellen's familiar. I had a son who did the last year and a half of his APS education and APS online. And I look at the rigor and creativity and, oh my gosh, heart that's gone into what our teachers are teaching now. And it's so incredible. Teddy and I have talked about it and said what a difference it would have made if this would have been the online option, right? With not to besmirch in any way our APS online, but this has so much more soul to it and so much more human contact. Even though it's virtual human contact, it's way more in depth. And I think that it'll open up all kinds of things in student schedules and exploration into things that they may never have been able to take.
Right, exactly. That's the dream. Even elementary, you know, if you think of our essential experiences that we have right now, imagine that you've got 3 groups within your elementary and they're all doing 3 different research projects together. And one group could be over at the Metro Parks doing some science experiment, and they could plug into the other 2 groups that are back at school for a lesson while they're out doing the science lab. and they can connect in for a little bit, and then they could be working with the Metro Parks, you know, as a partner of ours. There's so many possibilities. And all I want is to never go back to pre-COVID right now, because this has catapulted us, you know, into a whole new arena that I want to take advantage of this last quarter.
I had a comment too, just along the same lines. You know, while we have these aspirations, I just want to make sure we keeping the teachers in mind. Are they going to have that flexibility? Like, are we going to change our hiring practices eventually? You know, are we hiring remote teachers versus teachers who want to be in person? Or are our staff going to have to be able to do both? I'm just throwing that out there as well, because, you know, the teachers are going to have to be the ones.
Yeah.
I
think that's a really good point. You know, do we hire people who can have the flexibility to do both, so that maybe they'll choose to be more remote some years and face-to-face, or are we thinking of this more as kind of a team of expert remote people, and then you know, others that are doing maybe more the blended? I don't know, but that's a great discussion for us to have in terms of how we staff for this, and how do we build this into our hiring practices, right?
Yeah,
Well,
I just think about even, you know, we might help, you know, some of the institutions train to do that type of teaching. That could be a world-class model.
Absolutely. And not, you know, some universities are a little ahead of the curve in terms of preparing them for digital instruction, but others are not. And I think this would be another area for our sister universities for us to collaborate and really keep that teacher preparation in the forefront, because this is the new. I think I've told this group, the superintendent and I were a part of a scenario training. How many years ago? 15 years ago, 20 years ago, something like that, David. I can't remember.
About 15 years ago.
And it was the team that we were on. It was a military training on what you're anticipating 2020, 2025 was going to look like. And it was all based on massive data on trends and poverty rates and things like that. And our group really had the foresight to kind of design that we thought schools were going to be more of a hub of learning, and that learning would actually happen more out in the community and embedded, and this digital part was going to be a huge part of it. And I feel like every day we're walking towards that thing that we predicted, you know, 15, 20 years ago, that schools could be the hub, but a lot of the learning takes place in these other locations. It's exciting. It's very exciting. So that's all the topic, and I know we're out of time. We're actually a little bit over time, but those were the major topics that I wanted to share. I have on my homework some things, feedback from you on the website, that I'll go in and make some changes tonight. That's the joy of Google Sites, that you can make the change in 2 seconds and just post it. And then and also sharing out this timeline. I'll go ahead, Superintendent, if it's okay, I'll just share it to the full board.
Sure.
The timeline that I shared today. Anything else for the good of the cause before we close? All right. Thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you Monday. Have another great evening. Have a great evening tonight.
Enjoy, everybody.
Okay. All right.
Good night.
Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you, Ryan. Bye-bye.